All right, team. So this topic is the formula behind the FAFSA and the DREAM application. I wanted to note that anytime I mention FAFSA, I really am talking also about the DREAM app because the EFC formula is the same for the two, because the California Student Aid Commission, which is our state agency that governs the DREAM app, defaults to the EFC formula from the federal government. Okay, so with that, I'm kind of taking us back to like Government 101 real quick. And there's a purpose behind this because I like to understand myself the flow of like, why does the EFC formula exist and why do we comply, right? So first of all, there's of course 3 branches of U.S. government. The Constitution provides for a separation of the powers between those branches. We have the legislative, which is Congress, who makes the laws, right? So we call those statutes. We have the executive branch who carries out those laws, which would include the president, vice president, their cabinet members, and which also include the executive offices, one of which is the Department of Education. And of course, the third branch, which is judicial, they interpret the law when things, go awry, there's any kind of discrepancy and, times change, that kind of thing. So the Executive Office of Department of Education hosts their own website. Here it is. So here's the U.S. Department of Education. They are responsible for quite a bit. They go all the way from PK to college and beyond in terms of their responsibilities for federal programs that tie to education. So here they highlight student loans, grants. They have a section on laws and guidance, and then they do a lot of data analysis and data collection. Here's the current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, and they do their own kind of. It's not a very fancy website, but it does, they are responsible for quite a bit in terms of the educational pipeline. So within the U.S. Department of Education, kind of like, the campus has our office, well, the Department of Education has the Federal Student Aid Office, and Federal Student Aid is just one of the offices that reports up through Department of Education. So in our last topic, we went here to do the apply for aid, right? Well, this is their main site, and they list all kinds of helpful information. This site really caters to the public. So this is kind of a public-facing website. This is studentaid.well, if you type in studentaid.gov, it takes you to this root site. And it kind of guides, it's intended for families, counselors, that kind of thing, to guide them through the path to securing aid to go to college and preparing for finances for college. The opposing face of federal student aid, not opposing, but behind the scenes face, is this. It's the information, and actually let me go back to the main page. It is the information for financial aid professionals, right here, known as IFAP in the industry. So if you hear IFAP, the folks are talking about this particular site. So on this site, it hosts all of basically the regulations, right? So the Congress has designed statutes, and the Department of Education's responsibility is to interpret those as regulation, and they regulate to make sure that we're in compliance with federal law. So regulations are a form of interpretation of what we need to do in order to meet the law, right? And so financial aid offices all over the nation really strongly, the most popular link on here probably for our advising unit is the Federal Student Aid Handbook. You'll see they design it by aid year. Typically not a lot changes year to year, although in the last couple of years we went from prior year tax returns or prior year tax information to prior year tax information, meaning we're looking at 2 tax cycles ago. So for 18-19, that was the 2016 tax year that was used. For 19-20, it'll be 2017. For 2021, it'll be 2018, and so on and so forth. But this is really kind of the driving force behind everything we do. It gives us kind of what we're supposed to do in terms of, students' applications and verifying those applications, determining students' eligibility for federal aid, our eligibility to maintain administrative capability for federal aid, how we're supposed to calculate awards and package, process, there's withdrawals has its own volume, and then of course campus-based programs. So these are all, and then if you click up here, well, this is last year's, but these are all just components of one of the 18-19 Federal Student Aid Handbook. Now, this is what we use, again, to comply with the law, but again, it's regulation, so sometimes it's difficult, right, because it's an interpretation of the law, and when we're reading it, it's kind of like telephone, right? So someone reads something or hears something, and then they're trying to pass on that information. Well, some things kind of even little things can sometimes get lost in translation. So we don't really, if we ever have a question, our national organization has a site called Ask Regs, and it's extremely helpful. I would encourage you to bookmark it if you can. I believe we all have access because we have a institutional membership to this site. But basically it allows you to go in here and ask, or basically search for your question. Oh, and we'll see if I remember my password. There we go. Okay. And this is just an announcement. Okay, what are the rules? So you'll see like these are the common Q&As that are happening right now, but they do have by category. So let's say I had a question about verification, right? I'm going to go first to verification and search under that topic heading, and it's going to give me probably a list of all the commonly asked questions from institutions across the nation in terms of verification. And that looks like it's taking a little while to load. There we go. So here you go. Here's all the most common questions. Now that can be quite a bit, right? The list goes on. So sometimes what I wind up doing is just searching more specifically, you know, like let's say I have a question about the V4 flag, which is a verification code flag. It's going to search and bring up like the common things where that's a keyword. So it's very helpful. I'd encourage you to bookmark it. But again, this is our national organization, so that's a nonprofit organization that advocates on behalf of students and financial aid administrators. It is not affiliated with the government, so I just want to make that clear. It is an independent entity, but we do rely on them for sometimes a lot of, I mean, they do a lot of advocacy work on behalf of financial aid professionals, which is great. And they're looked to as a resource for the legislative branch and when laws are being made and that kind of thing. So it is a great resource for us as well. So going back to the IFAP. Okay, so within here, within this whole IFAP site, there is the EFC Formula guide. So again, we've kind of winnowed down, right? We have the higher level government branches to the executive office of the U.S. Department of Education to the specific unit within that department, which is known as Federal Student Aid. And they produce this each year, though it's informed by the law, right? So the law behind this is Congress, right? Because Congress makes the laws. So when people say, well, this formula is not fair, you know, it treats some groups or some even regionally, because it's a blanket formula for the whole nation. Well, California is more expensive. There is a point there that perhaps it's not fully accommodating for the full costs that are associated with regional differences, but it would take a federal, when we say it would take an act of Congress, we literally mean it would take an act of Congress to change this formula, because this formula is legislated by law, or is rooted in law, okay? And it'll even tell you here, this method for determining the is found in Part F, the Title IV of Higher Education Act. So it's in the law, so there's not much we can do about how it's calculated. I'm not going to go through each of these pages. What I would ask you in this topic is to go ahead and read through page 7. What that's going to do, and I'm going to, sorry for the getting you dizzy right here, it's going to talk to you about 3 separate formulas. So while the EFC is one composite number, how it's derived depends on the type of student you're working with, okay? So we have 3 types of students. We have dependents, we have independent students who don't have children or other dependents but are married, and then we have independent students who do have children or other dependents but are not married. So these are the 3 main formulas that drive the EFC. So which path is kind of like a choose the adventure type thing, right? So we got to figure out who our student is. Then within those, we have regular formula and we have a simplified formula. And we'll get into the details of that, although if you read 1 through 7, it will also detail that. What's not listed in here is a 3rd subformula, which is called auto zero. So kind of like what it sounds like. If a student meets the criteria for an auto zero calculation, then their EFC is, as you guess, automatically zeroed, right? But they don't have worksheets in here because there is no calculation. And I'll just show you this briefly. Here's the formula sheets, and we will go through some of this at our meeting. So you don't need to go through it now, but I just want to kind of introduce you to here's just to calculate the parent's contribution. We have to go through all these steps, right? And then here's the student's contribution. And then we add those two together to get the EFC. So we're going to do some examples in our meeting. You'll see this is regular formula. And then if you go to the next page, here's simplified formula. And you'll notice that the difference is we block out the assets, because in simplified, if the students meet the criteria for a simplified formula, then assets, even if they have $1 million in assets, are off the table. Okay, so again, if you can please read 1 through 7, and we will have more discussion on this at the meeting. Oh, and just one last thing. Here's just some agency details about the Department of Education. You know, they have their main address and that kind of stuff. Popular services, the White House, right? They report up to the White House because they're, again, an executive office. And then here are all the related, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I wanted to show you all the related offices, because some of these do cross paths, right? So like Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, well, they're another subunit, right? So that reports up through Department of Ed. So all very interesting information, and I look forward to talking to you at our